Don't take your thoughts for granted. Your intentions, your drives, the way you feel, the dominant emotions you're experiencing when you wake up, throughout the day, before you go to sleep, and every minute in between. Those gaps in your awareness, in your consciousness, they're very important, They tell you about the theme, the dominant theme, the common denominator of your state of being, what you lean towards, what your tendency is, what your propensities are, despite what you think about the kind of person you are. Because oftentimes what we think about ourselves, how we present ourselves to the world, has nothing to do with the reality of who we are. This, although on the surface might sound a little bit shocking, but it's actually not. When we are all by ourselves, facing a mirror perhaps, and we see how things really are with ourselves, what makes us tick. It's not a pretty picture, of course, for so many, because it demands that we become honest with ourselves and call things the way they are, call them out. That is the reason why we meditate also, to be experiencing a moment of honesty. Honesty. Something that is lacking in the world today. Truly lacking. And when you have an absence of honesty, you have almost, if not completely, a loss of virtue. Loss of virtue towards yourself. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of people do drugs, get into self-destructive behaviors, because they cannot stand themselves, the lies we keep telling ourselves about ourselves. But you have to release that tension somehow, right? So you release it towards the world. You release it towards that neighbor, that policy, that or this thing that you're surrounded by. The thing that rubs you the wrong way. You see how you feel how I'd rather not have this person around me. Let us just wipe him or wipe her out of existence. I wish I could do that. All this kind of thought are generated from a frustration that is taking place within you. Nowhere else. Who said the world is supposed to be perfect? Or even perfect? Remotely. It's a work in progress. Sometimes it fails. Sometimes it's way out there. It's in a decrepit state, like it is at the moment. But it's going through a state of, shaking off some of its old branches and leaves, and sometimes those big branches are going to have to be broken off. But focus on your own state of mind that is taking place. But you are unaware of it. You're choosing to not be aware of it. You see, every thought, so long as we're not awakened, every single thought, every single drive, every single emotion we have has behind it three primary drives. Three different types of momentum, if you will. One has lust behind it, lust or greed. It's a push. It's an invisible but very, very, very powerful push. Even if it's a desire to say something to someone. When you bring in sati, when you bring in mindfulness, correct mindfulness, responsible, virtuous mindfulness into your awareness, and just say, okay, hold on, before I say this, could I please check the references? Can I check the papers of this thought, this drive? Let's take a moment. I'll say it, just you can even play that game with yourself. Say, I will say this, but I just first need to check where this drive is coming from. The intention or the wanting to be saying this thing or to be doing this thing, which feels like there's a whole Niagara behind you, like incredible force, powerful current behind you, pushing you to do this thing. So you need to get curious to check to see what is that drive. So when you take a glance, when you look at the nature of the thought behind this, meaning the momentum behind this, through that fog, when the mind clears because you're applying yoniso manasikara, which is wise reflection, the moment you do that, suddenly you see, oh, there is lust behind this. There's deep, powerful craving behind this. It really doesn't care what it was that you are intending to do, so long as it's going to create a release of that tension that's been building up. This is the trick. This is the secret with which we are kept in delusion from life to life. This is what Lord Buddha called tanha. The thirst, the craving, the desire to jump and do the other thing. That's why we go from life to life, skulking around, jumping around like a flea, like a June bug, from one point to the next. We don't care. As long as there's the momentum and there is the natural process of wanting to release that pressure. Okay, that's why, because of a lack in awareness, you just want to go ahead and say those things that you know you might regret afterwards. But you close your eyes, you clench your teeth, and you say them. And something in your heart goes, ooh, I did say it, didn't I? And now you go through the whole remorse. It's very similar to releasing anger, releasing sexual energy. It's a release of tension. So, looking at a drive, looking at the action itself, but not being so focused on the action. Take a moment, take a pause. Give yourself that momentary gap and say, okay, hold on. Let me check the thought behind you. The invisible presence, powerful presence of what is compelling me to do this or to say this. So I said three things, right? So that was one. Raga or lobha, which is lust or greed. Next comes the mean quality of mind, or the hatred-driven, anger-driven, what we call dosa. The I hate it drive. It's very similar to the first one. This is when you are saying to yourself, well, I'm just tolerating the situation, or I'm tolerating this person. Meanwhile, you're clenching your teeth and you're holding yourself in your throat muscles are tightening up, your gut muscles, your diaphragm is not functioning that well because you're no longer actually breathing properly, deeply. You're probably clenching also your fists. Meanwhile, you're faking a smile, and your heart is not even feeling any metta. And you're basically shoveling yourself, you're pushing yourself through that moment so you do not blow up. Meanwhile, it is there, it's building up momentum like a volcano. And then suddenly it blows up out of proportion. And in some cases, it blows up on people, on situations, and during situations where you're left stunned, absolutely stunned as to why, or especially people around you are stunned as to what happened. Why would you do such a thing? Well, the answer is simple. If we take a moment, if we pause from doing it, meaning saying that angry word or pushing the person, whether figuratively or physically, or writing that nasty email, putting the person in the in their spot, type of a thing. So taking a moment, creating a gap, an intentional gap between you executing this action and looking, taking a breath and looking at the source of where this momentum is coming from. Why do I feel my chest as if it's congesting, as if it's tightening up? As the pressure keeps clawing into my heart and I can't even breathe, and my face is getting all flushed up, red, and people can tell something's wrong, and I'm really faking having a pleasant demeanor because people are going to notice, and there's this terrible, bitter taste in my mouth. I need to blow up. Well, guess what? That is also the building up of pressure, which is trying so hard to be released. Again, just like I said earlier, with craving, it's the same momentum. In both cases, there is the strong presence of delusion, of ignorance, what Lord Buddha called avidya. Avidya, meaning not having the ability to see, to be wise, to discern as to what is taking place. And that's what you're doing when you're practicing samma sati, right mindfulness. You're really taking a moment with yourself, because that's where the real show is taking place, within yourself. And then the third of these is the predominant one, is the mother of the other two, which is the lack in wisdom to a point where you're in a foggy state of awareness throughout the time. And that's what most of us are in, so long as we're not awakened. That state of indifference, the neutral that we abhor so much, we hate so much. Because the other two I just mentioned are like the two extreme points of a pendulum, the far edges of a pendulum. And that's where we're at all the time. We somehow have obliterated, we have erased the middle portion, as if it doesn't exist. Meanwhile, that is the biggest part of what emotions are, the biggest proportion or percentage of emotions we are feeling, meaning that dull state, neutrality, because it's not as exciting as even the deplorable, the thing that we hate so much, we run away from, we don't like. Even that is much more preferable than being in a neutral state. You know, the time where you have attained or achieved or received what you were craving all this time. And then what happens? There's this gap. There's no emotions. There's no emotions as in high highs and low lows. And what do? You get bored. Oh, we don't like that, do we? And now we start craving for something else, to run away from this terrible state of nothing happening. So the two extremes I mentioned, this is the third one. This is the state of ignorance. This is what Lord Buddha would call moha, or delusion. There cannot be moha if the mind is in a sati state. You don't get jolted, for example, when something happens. It's impossible. You don't become scared if something out of the norm happens. For example, if your skin touches something that was rather unexpected, you don't get just like jumping out of your skin. That never happens. Why? Because there was sati all along. You see what's happening and you observe it. So this is the third momentum, which is it's more powerful than the other two, by the way. Even though it is deceptively, even in some cases, looking like it's benign state, it's not. It's anything but, because it is the absence of wisdom. It is the absence of sati sampajanya, mindfulness and full awareness. Because that's the dangerous zone of your day, of your mind state throughout the day, where your mind naturally will want to flow out and go to the craving mode, or the I want to get upset at something mode. And there's plenty of things to be upset about, right? So check the papers of your thoughts. Check. You're not an automaton. You're not a robot. So do pay attention. If you don't, well, who will? This is the work that you're here for, ultimately, to really understand. That's what the Dhamma teaches. That's what Lord Buddha taught. No one can take credit for you. No one can be blamed for you and the actions that you're committing. So if that's the case, then why aren't we checking the sources as to why I do these things, why I say these things, why I think these things? Cheer up. There's so much you're in control of, despite what the world keeps on telling us. You have so much you're in control of. But start with honesty. This requires honesty. Please do yourself that favor and just be honest for a change with yourself. All right? I'll stop here.